We're going to live stream.
Yeah, I can sit here though. Easier. Thank you. Oh, yep. We don't. Sure. I'll go one.
Well, it could be.
That's probably been really hard that's the question today. Trying to stop them doing that, but really. Yeah. Enjoy to 0.14. Could we go both phones? True.
Stop. Good team, how we doing? Exciting, exciting, exciting. While we wait, you know, we can fill time. We can have a little chat. My question is, I reckon we go around the room and discuss our mascots. Tell me their names. Maybe give me one personality trait of your mascot. So would we like? Let's start over here with Waikato. Let's move to Zoom.
Our mascots are the Paw Patrol team.
Lovely.
So this is Marshall. He's a firefighter. He really cares about the community. This is Cop Dog. He also really cares about the community. He likes protecting citizens.
Nice.
And then this is the recycling dog. Not only does he care about the community, he cares about the environment as well.
Lovely. It's a good trifecta there. Auckland, what do we got? What do we got?
So this is a bit of controversy over the name. It's now known as Reese, named after Warriors superstar Reese Walsh.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's basically it.
Excited. Personality trait? How would you describe their personality in one word?
Electric.
Electric.
What's the controversy?
Oh, just the people don't want that to be the name, but
Right. That's exciting. Oh, and we're just about ready to zoom.
Have you guys Auckland written your names on the ballot?
that's what I'm doing.
And everyone's okay to be streamed? Coolio. Brilliant. So excited. I'll get that ballot and then we will take it off. So, hi everyone. I'm Jamie. I'm your chair. I'm not an adjudicator. I'm just here to cheer you on. I'm really excited to cheer you guys. I've cheered Waikato already, but Auckland Blue, you're new to me, so that's exciting. I have to get used to your names. So let's get a little admin out of the way while the adjudicators look at that. So obviously I'm going to clap once at 1 minute, clap once at 7 minutes, clap twice at 8 minutes, and then if you go over about 8:15, I'll clap 3 times. It'll be a bit awkward. So let's go around the room. Let's do our names. Give me your name. If you want to, you can give a pronoun. Don't have to, just if you're feeling it. So let's start with first F. Who we got?
Hi, I'm Robert Hoskins.
Go to Robert.
I'm Andrew Q, second F, he, him.
I'm Travis Homer, third F, he, him as well.
Thank you. Let's move over to Nick.
Hi, I'm Isaac, first Nick, he, him.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Hiso, second neg, she, her.
I'm Jack, third neg, he, him.
Cool. Thank you so much. So, the moot today, would you like to read it? Isaac.
This house regrets the popularity of girlboss narratives.
Brilliant. I love this mood. Okay. So, if we're ready to rumble, we're ready to rumble? Ready to rumble. Brilliant. Okay. So, without further ado, I invite the first speaker of the Affirmative team, Robert Hoskins. Take the floor. Woo! Woo! Go, Robert.
Most men will never be CEOs, will never hold corporate positions, and most women won't either. The girl boss narrative actively creates unrealistic and harmful expectations, and actually it worsens the ability of the feminist movement as a whole to make the sorts of change that influence all women, not just the top 1%, but all women, no matter what their goals, no matter their aspirations, no matter what their ability levels may be. In this house, on this side of the house, we regret the overemphasis of girl boss narratives in the media, portrayals in things like feminist blogs, feminist websites, and generally as overrepresented by the feminist movement. This is especially in the way that the feminist movement has co-opted it to form the backbone of what we see as modern feminism, the way that these ideals are being portrayed, the things that are mostly discussed around feminism. Instead, we would prefer a world where stories of collective activism, collective change, working together to create the sorts of changes that the feminist movement really wants. We don't support the pursuit of corporate success being the primary means of change in the workplace. We think that collective action is much more effective here. Look, in this debate, we are a team of 3 guys, but we aren't against women holding positions of power. We think that it's really important that they're able to do that, but we think that the way that these narratives are being framed are actually actively antithetical to the long-term goals of the feminist movement. We think that we get better change on our side of the house. 2 ways that this works. Firstly, we think that this has a negative impact on the feminist movement, and secondly, we think that this actively harms the workplace environment and the women working within it. Firstly, on the impact of the feminist movement, because currently the feminist movement has prioritized girl boss as its main narrative stream and the way it frames its success stories, and adopted the individual pursuit of corporate success as a feminist act. This has 2 really big harms. Firstly, it ties feminism to individual success, because we think in this debate the feminist movement is there to advocate for wide-reaching change that impacts a large number of people, supports women across the country. The feminist movement should be doing things like pushing against hypersexualization in the media, should be doing things like pushing for equality of pay and removing abuses in the workplace. The emphasis on girl boss narratives takes time and energy away from these causes. It limits the ability of this movement to make legislative change, to actually influence the way that these laws and structures are being passed. This is the way that we get far more wide-reaching and large-scale transformative change. Things like workplace protections, things like legislation that ensures equal pay. Note this applies to all women, not just the top CEOs, which is what they get on their side of the house. The neg here only gets a very small percentage of women impacted by the abundance of girl boss narratives. What we get is women, no matter what industry they're working in, no matter what level of a company they may be part of, we get improved outcomes for them. They aren't able to achieve that. Secondly, we think these narratives alienate women from the movement itself, because generally the narratives that are promoted are only the success stories, the very top positions in these companies. And regardless of gender, as I flagged in my introduction, not everyone will be a CEO, not everyone will be a corporate exec. This means that it isn't a reality for most people that they are going to be mirroring, their lives aren't going to be mirroring the things that they see portrayed in the media. There are a wide variety of goals, aspirations, lifestyles that are that are sought after by women from a wide variety of upbringings, right? We can't just lump them together as one sort of homogenous group which wants the same thing. Many people don't associate with this sort of grind mentality, this sort of sacrificing everything to make it in the workforce, because it does take a lot to make it to these top CEO positions, especially for women when they have to face against the forces of the patriarchy. This means that a lot of people are going to be feeling like the feminist movement is unable to represent them, unable to represent how they want their life to live. We're prioritizing here a tiny sliver of stories against the backdrop of people who don't feel that that really represents them. This does two things.
On that,
Firstly, it decreases the political capital of the movement. We think we get disunity and decreased membership. People are less likely to stand for things, stand alongside the movement, and less likely to stand for political change. This decreases the ability to make legislation to pass these transformative actions. Secondly, we think that many women no longer have access to the support structures and the support that the feminist movement provides, right? This is things like talking to other women in the feminist movement, getting support, conversing with people in similar situations to yourself. When you don't feel like you have the connection, when you don't feel like you're being represented, you're far less likely to engage with that sort of support. We think that's really harmful, because these support structures are what push women to fight against the patriarchy, fight against abuses in any sorts of environment that they might be in. This also especially applies to centrist women who wouldn't necessarily associate with the feminist movement very strongly. And then these are the women least likely to be pursuing positions of high corporate power because of things like culture, because of things like upbringing. They might have different goals. They might want to have a higher focus on family, and we think that's perfectly valid. We don't think these stories should be rejected, and these women are the ones who are especially needed for pushing the bipartisan change that will actually benefit all women. Secondly, then, on the impact of the workforce, we think there are 4 big harms that happen in the workforce. Firstly, it creates a lot of tension between women in corporate environments, because these narratives promote success over pretty much anything else. We think we get a lot of infighting for top positions, both between women and men. What this means is antagonism within companies between women and men. This means that women are far more likely to overlook issues in the business if it means that they're able to make it to the top stops. This looks like low-level sexual harassment. This looks like issues in hiring decisions, right? If it means that they're not likely to make it to that top position, if it means that their stories can't be celebrated by the movement because that's what they're looking for as a success story, they're far more likely to overlook it, far less likely to call it out. When massive emphasis is placed on making it, the culture of these companies is allowed to continue to fester. Compare this to outside of the house, where we get women working together, where we get actively working to eliminate the culture, right? And we still get women in top positions on our side of the house. It's not like we're saying that women shouldn't be holding these positions of power. We think that the people who have the incentive to go after these top positions are still going to be making it, and we actually give them the legislation, give them the platform to pursue their goals. I'll take a POI.
Okay, girl boss narrative has led to more female representation, more women in power. Aren't you more likely to get collective change when these people are in positions of power?
Look, we think that when people are going to be positions of power, as I just mentioned anyway, but girl boss narratives actually harm a lot of women who go to the middle management, who stay at lower positions of power. We think we need transformative change throughout companies. Secondly, we think that these are very male-dominated industries, and having women work together is the only way to actually actively overcome issues around patriarchy in these companies. They should be working together to establish support structures, to establish ways of overcoming structural issues. We think that because there are so few women in this industry, it's especially harmful in the male-dominated industries when they aren't working together, when they are aiming for the top positions. Thirdly, we think we still get the ideals of forging your own identity, standing up to the patriarchy through things like community projects, initiatives, actually standing for legislative change, supports that apply irrespective of what position you're going for. We think we still get that transformative change. We still get that empowerment that they're going to try and claim. Fourthly, we think women in top positions are far more likely to actually help others who are below them. There isn't that pressure on them to continue in that top position, to continue to be a representative of the whole community. We think that they're far less threatened by communities. We think that this is far better for the feminist movement as a whole, as well as the corporate environment. Very, very proud.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was fantastic. Okay, now we're going to move on, and we're going to have the negating team open up their side of the case with Isaac getting up. Woo! Take the floor, Isaac. Yeah. Woo! got a Let's Go Isaac from Stella McKenzie.
Historically, women have been shut out of positions of power. They've been seen as subservient individuals that aren't capable of holding those executive positions, holding middle management positions, pursuing their own individual success and being assertive. The girl boss narrative is something that has countered that in the last 10 years, and that has started to get dramatic change in female representation in all positions of power, in all walks of life. What do we support in today's debate? Two things. Firstly, we support the popularity of this girl boss narrative. Secondly, we think this specifically looks like a couple of things. Firstly, the idea of being girl boss being shared in popular culture. So it looks like TV shows about like females in like middle management positions being assertive. It looks like portrayals of people like Jessica Pearson or in Suits or Claire in Modern Family commanding positions of power. It looks like having all-female casts in Ocean's 8. Secondly, we think that this narrative looks like girl bosses being celebrated by the feminist movement. It looks like people like Jacinda Ardern, like Kamala Harris, like RBG being celebrated and promoted as great role models for women, for feminism. Crucially, what we support in today's debate is what we want to achieve is a world where we get women into more positions of power, but that we make their lives a lot more enjoyable, a lot more copable. We are the side that wants to liberate women in today's debate. We're going to prove this through three substantives. Firstly, how the popularity of the girl boss narrative liberates and empowers women. Secondly, why men respond positively to women embracing this narrative. And Hisa will split telling you how this particularly helps minority women. But before that, let's take a look at what we were offered by side Affirmative. First thing I want to point out is that their counter model of collective action or women working collectively was the most vague and ambiguous thing that they could have suggested. They never pointed out what this actually looks like. They haven't explained what women suddenly like working collectively looks like. We need explanation. But secondly, we tell you that even if they do come up with an explanation, we think it's actually more difficult in a lot of cases for women to work collectively. A few reasons for this. Firstly, because it's something that's really intangible and it's hard for everyone to like grasp and know and be on the same page. Secondly, collective working requires collective agreement between all women, and a lot of women have different ideas of what they want individually. But thirdly, we say when you've got collective movement and women are like saying, we all hate men, we want to get this change, we think that that actually results in men feeling a lot more threatened rather than women individually pursuing success. Their next key claim was that a focus on individual success means that you can't get any policy change.
Yeah.
A couple of responses to this. Firstly, we just deny empirically that a focus on your ability to, a girl boss narrative means that you don't push for any legislative change. The feminist movement has a lot of political capital, a lot of airtime, a lot of people like Kamala Harris, like Jacinda Ardern in positions of power. We can get both. But secondly, we tell you that actually the pursuit of individual success helps get this policy through. Because when women get into positions of power in the corporate world and the political world, because we celebrate this narrative, that has meant that we're actually able to pass huge reform, like getting more maternity leave for women in New Zealand, like getting changes regarding like free period products that helps all women. Their final key claim was that most women don't become CEOs, so the narrative is misleading. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, we just tell you this narrative isn't just about CEOs or prime ministers. As I outlined in the model, it's actually a lot of the time about like women being just assertive in middle management situations. Why is this? We tell you because a lot of women want to be able to engage with it. They want this narrative to be accessible. The feminist movement is likely, therefore, to do something that a lot of people are able to grasp, are able to reach. But thirdly, we just tell you that even if it does focus on CEOs, this still creates role models. And the point of role models is not necessarily that you're going to like completely fulfill all of their work. When you're a young rugby player, doesn't mean that it's bad that you look up to Richie McCaw. Okay, let's now take a look at our case. Firstly, how this popularity of this narrative liberates and empowers women. What happens when this narrative is popular? A couple of things. Firstly, more people buy into and accept the narrative of a girl boss narrative, because not only a critical mass is created and more people want to jump on board this movement, but secondly, you're exposed to the narrative so much. When you have the media portraying female leaders, when you have the feminist movement celebrating female politicians, that creates a lot of exposure, and so it has the ability to change both men and women's perspective. But secondly, we tell you it starts a wider societal discussion around the historical oppression of women, because the narrative goes like we're specifically being assertive now because in the past we weren't able to. We were locked out of being able to do this. We tell you that reduces ignorance around the mistreatment of women in the past when that is exposed through this narrative. How does this specifically liberate women? 3 ways. Firstly, more women are likely to enter the workforce, not only because there's a celebration of female success in the business world, but because you're exposed to women's stories doing well, and you know that it's possible. You get role models. You see women in positions of power and think, I can be that cabinet minister. I can be that middle manager in a business. Why is this so important when more women enter the workforce? Not only because it leads to more women having financial independence, where in the most moderate cases, they don't defer to males in relationships because they're the breadwinner, but in the most extreme cases, they're able to get out of like abusive relationships because they actually had some financial independence. But secondly, we tell it's so important because it offers women fulfillment, because work can offer fulfillment. Secondly, we tell you more women within the business world are more likely to actively show leadership qualities or put themselves forward for promotions, because this is what is celebrated by this girl boss narrative that helps women get into these positions of power. Finally, we tell you women are less likely to put up with sexual harassment or assault. This directly responds to that last part of their case, because when women are encouraged to be assertive and not subservient to men, they're not going to accept harassment or sweep it under the rug, as so many have done before in the last 10 years. It's no coincidence that the Me Too movement has coincided with the prevalence of this narrative in the last 5 or 10 years. These are huge benefits that have tangible impacts on women's quality of life. I'll take a POI.
For these women in these male-dominant fields, when they're acting assertive in this way, they're usually cutting into the achievements and contributions of other women and competing on that rise to the corporate ladder. How do you respond to that?
Look, we think there's always going to be competition within people, but we think, as I told you, when women get into positions of power, they're able to help other women. We told you about that down at this case. Secondly, then, let's take a look at why men respond positively, because the crucial context is that there's always been a male patriarchy, and so we believe that you need to be assertive to get change. Why is this? A few reasons. Firstly, because men themselves are mostly assertive and value this policy. So most executives hiring want to see leaders, want to see assertive men. So women who are subservient or defer to men are unlikely to get this job because they're seen as not having that killer instinct to be on the board. We get more women hired or in positions of power because of this. Secondly, we tell you it reframes female assertiveness in a positive light, because the former narrative before the girl boss movement was that any woman who was assertive was just called a bitch by men. Crucially, the girl boss narrative has changed this into a positive thing, and it makes it a lot more harder for men to use the same narrative, for men to be able to call women those atrocious names on our side of the house. When the narrative is so popular, men can't quit using these regressive narratives and names because they get called out. Finally, we just tell you men have to consider female candidates for jobs and positions, because a lot of moderate men do want to promote more women, but if women don't apply for these jobs, it's hard for them to do it. As we showed, we get far more women applying, we get more in the application pool, they get more in positions of power. So proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for that speech, Isaac. Now, we're going to move on to the second speech from the Affirmative team. I invite Andrew up to give us your speech. Woo! Go, Andrew!
Panel, nobody in this room today is going to disagree that women should stand up for themselves. Or at least, I hope so. But I think we've made it clear that the popularity and messaging of #girlboss narratives is incredibly detrimental. It drags down the community and good change building that the feminist movement has created over the past 2 decades, and we're winning this debate today on that idea. In this speech, I'm going to bring you firstly some rebuttals centering on 2 main points of contention, and then a split point about how the narrative of girlboss creates unnecessary resistance, but we'll begin with sections of rebuttal. Generally, this debate so far has centered around two main areas. First, on the impact on women, like individually and within the workforce, and second, on the impact on the feminist movement as a whole. Let's begin by talking about the impact on women in the workforce. We were clear right from first that this leads to much more toxic workplace culture. This leads to women putting others down in order to gain more competition and higher roles. This leads to worse outcomes for them overall. Let's take a look at what we heard from side negating on this. We heard three kind of main key contentions. Firstly, we heard an idea that, look, at least they get like more women in power, which leads to like more change, right? We have three responses to this. Firstly, we tell you that it's just not true that it's like that much more women, right? Because the women that generally already get into like big middle management roles and like kind of top leadership roles are often those that are typically already quite assertive today. They're ones that are like they have like undergone good education, have grown up in lives with like kind of good backgrounds, and similar to how many men make it into top leadership positions. That means that like the actual impact of girl boss narratives that we typically see on social media generally aren't as impactful towards moving more women into these positions. But secondly though, even if it does have like some kind of impact, right, there just isn't really that much room to have more, like loads more people in positions of power as side negating wants you to believe, right? We can't have a panel of like 300 people working on a corporation's top board. The problem here is that negating wants to paint this idea that there's suddenly going to be this huge influx of women into positions of leadership, into management roles as a result of these narratives. We don't see that happening. Thirdly, though, even if they do prove that there are slightly better outcomes for the number of women in corporate work, we see that that's just undermined, right, by like the much worse outcomes that we outlined at first. The things such as like corporate infighting, exposing women to like this idea of like kind of corporate, of like kind of putting others down for their own gain, that's highly detrimental. Secondly, then, we heard this idea that like, oh, but we do want women to be more like assertive. We want them to stand up for themselves, etc. Two responses to this. Firstly, we tell you that sure, it's okay that like we get some women like kind of standing up for themselves more in the workforce. But again, that doesn't that response fails to negate many of our harms about like the serious dangers of promoting an environment in the workforce where people are putting each other's down. Secondly, it's just not true that like women aren't going to like vie for like these top leadership roles as a result of these narratives. Because typically, when you see stories pertaining to like girl boss narratives on social media, it's not like, hey guys, I made it into middle management, yippee. It's like, hey, I'm the leader of like this top company. Hey, I'm like the CFO of one of the world's largest startups. Those are the things that actually crucially get airtime. Those are the things that people are going for. Okay. Lastly, then, on the idea of that women will stand up for themselves, again, three responses. Firstly, obviously, we're not going to contest that women shouldn't stand up for themselves. That should be obvious. Secondly, though, the problem is that women standing up for themselves doesn't necessarily need to entail the things that side negating wants it to entail. We don't think that women standing up for themselves looks like things such as fighting for equal pay, such as fighting for better provisions for like dealing with corporate workplace bullying. It doesn't look like women like going into a highly toxic corporate environment that needs more fundamental change than merely like the girl boss movement. That's not something that we should be fighting for. Look, crucially then, the comparative here is that our side is the one that actually focuses the crucial airtime in the feminist movement towards better narratives, things such as actually working on getting equal pay, actually working on dealing with the correct provisions for like women's well-being in the workforce. That's crucially important. Those things that actually affect everyone, and we outlined that from first, and crucially negating has not done enough to counter this. Our side crucially ensures that the popular narratives of feminism apply to and help all women, not just those who are able to like go in and like make it to like the higher ranks of corporate ladders, which is a very subjective and small group of people. Before I continue, I'll take a PI.
So is it more likely that a young woman is going to go to university or try and pursue a career in the workforce when we celebrate individual success, or when your side doesn't and shuts that out?
Look, we tell you that like success can still be celebrated just generally, right? But we can't just like go in and tell all women that like, oh, this is a crucial part of the feminist movement. All women are now like being encouraged to go into like high corporate ladders. That just pushes women towards, we've emphasized that just pushes women towards like an ideal that often many of them don't want to in the first place. That's highly harmful. Okay, secondly and surely we're going to quickly talk about the impact on the movement, on the feminist movement as a whole. look, the only real contention, the only real point we heard on this from negating was that they help change the narrative of the movement and ensure things were better overall. Two responses. Firstly, it's just not true that like male leaders in the patriarchy are now going to start moving themselves out of leadership roles, right? Like we're not going to see the sudden shift towards acceptance of like females in like the kind of corporate ladder as they want you to believe. We see that like leadership roles, people in leadership roles today are generally quite protective of those roles, which means that if anything, they're now going to be more antagonized towards these women and therefore be like more worse off as a result. Secondly, we know that this can lead to much worse things such as increased workplace bullying, increased like infighting between corporations, which I'll get to in my split point now. Okay, look, at the end of this rebuttal, we just want to quickly explain our alternative. Our side of the house is the one that crucially fights towards giving airtime to greater issues. We are also the side that crucially gets better outcomes in the workplace. All right, let's move on to our split then about how this narrative creates unnecessary resistance. Because look, we've all agreed that workplaces are excessively competitive, especially in the areas of high corporate ladders where vying for executive roles is extremely intense and aggressive. This is important today because though it's those corporate roles that side negating crucially wants like women to be trying to achieve. This looks like middle management roles, looks like high executive roles. Girl boss narratives drastically worsen outcomes here in two additional ways. Firstly, we tell you that it leads to increased negative views from existing leaders, right? Because the massive exposure towards girl boss ideals often creates distances between each other. That was a great point that our first speaker brought up. But secondly, though, it also makes those in existing positions of power, regardless of gender, more wary. This leads to like worse treatment, etc. The point where it becomes more, the optics make it clear, become more visible. That like say these narratives are pushing like women that may not be as qualified towards vying towards these like higher roles. This is like highly harmful because even if those women are qualified, which many of them are, it paints the optics that they might not be, that they're just doing it as a result of like kind of widespread social media campaigns. This means that like this actually serves to like kind of put women applying for higher roles down in society, and this means that like people in higher leadership roles are more like against them as a result. Secondly, and quickly, this creates divides within the feminist movement, right? Because for a large majority of people, regardless of gender, the duties of corporate upskilling are scary. And when girl-boss narratives become so prominent, women who feel these ways become more distant from the feminist movement. This creates disillusionment and divide within it. That's highly harmful. Look, at the end of this debate, if we prove that girl-boss movements only serve to distance women from feminist movements and quell their success, we win today's debate. So far, we've done that.
Woo! Thank you so much, Andrew. All right, now, if we're ready, adjudicators, move on. Yep, groovy. We're going to invite the second speaker from the negating team, Hiso. Woo!
The affirmative side attacks the girl boss movement without actually fully engaging in what it actually is. It's not about getting women into being CEOs. It's about instilling values into young girls about assertiveness, standing up for yourself, believing in your own values, and having pride in your individual aspirations. They think that they get better outcomes because they have this huge collective uprising without giving us any mechanisms as to why this uprising is actually going to happen in the first place. If we take this to the logical extension, it will never happen. They're never going to get the benefits that the girl boss movement has actually had, and how the girl boss movement has gotten women into jobs. 3 points in this speech. Firstly, why the girl boss movement is the most productive avenue for feminism to pursue. Secondly, this point that was critically unresponded to by the affirmative team on how we actually improve the quality of life for women and how we actually get them into more jobs. And finally, I was going to bring you my split point about why this narrative has significantly uplifted minority women and women of color. So on this first point about why the girl boss movement is the most productive avenue, the affirmative team have come out and said that they have rejected this claim and said that they would prefer a collective female movement that had less of a focus on individual actions and have more of a collective uprising. Firstly, we tell you that this from the get-go is quite problematic because men are celebrated for their individual aspirations. Men are celebrated for their individual goals and their career-oriented goals. They're not expected to make a huge male coalition to respond to these oppressions in society. Why should women have to wait for a huge coalition to solve all their issues for them when the girl boss movement has actually instilled in them individual values and actual avenues for them to pursue opportunities and uplift themselves? They also said that they prefer feminism because it's actually going to be much better for focusing on smaller issues like sexual harassment. First, we tell you that it's much more inefficient for a huge movement like this to actually arise rather than actual women knowing their rights and standing up for themselves. Secondly, they said that that they prefer the collective movement. However, we tell you that not all women have the same views. We'd rather individual women having the choice. If they want to pursue their careers, they can. If they want to pursue motherhood, they can do that as well. On their side, it's the side that belittles women for making a choice. It's their side, when they have this collective movement, it'll belittle the women who don't come with them. It has no flexibility whatsoever. It's not very productive for feminism. Secondly, they said that there was a huge amount of women-on-women tension and that this is going to be really damaging for women. Firstly, we believe that from the get-go, there's an incredible amount of criticism for women who pull the ladder up behind them. We've seen this from historic examples such as Thatcher, and we see a huge decrease in this because of the amount of criticism that these women have faced. However, even if this is true to a small extent on their side, they don't address how we have a huge amount of women who are actually going to want to work with women. They're not going to address the idea of like Jacinda Ardern being a huge girl boss and making an incredible amount of opportunities for young girls to engage in like business and STEM. They're not engaging with this part of the debate, and they're not actually like giving us any analysis as to why these benefits that come intrinsically from one individual woman rising up above men and taking positions of power and helping other girls up is harmful to the feminist movement. Finally, they said that it alienates women from feminism because not all women can become CEOs. We don't think that this is a huge problem because even if women can't become CEOs, we think this is a hell of a lot better than no women being CEOs whatsoever. People viewing CEOs as a position that only men can hold. We think that it's incredibly beneficial for young girls to think that when they're in school, they might be able to become CEOs. It's incredibly true that not all women are going to become this, but you have more women who are pursuing academic pathways. You have more women who are pursuing pathways instead, so that they can actually work with these strong, powerful women who are the 1%. You have a much stronger female society. Finally, they gave us a small point at second as to why there's less media time around the girl boss movement. We think that this is ridiculous. The whole point of this debate is because the girl boss movement is so popular, and they're saying that they regret this. They can't say as well that there's no media time and feminism is like blocked out from public discourse. We don't think this actually stands. Secondly, on how we actually improve the quality of life for women. They basically told us that this incredibly detriments like women's quality of life because there's going to be more sexual harassment in the workplace and there's going to be less women standing up for other women. And they completely didn't respond to any of the material that Isaac gave at first as to why more men are going to feel like better working with these women who have an individual sense of self, who are actually going to be assertive and stand up for themselves in their places of work. Firstly, when you have women who are not assertive and they have never had these values instilled upon them, because let's make it clear, they have never had this sort of movement before. Women have never had the opportunity to be seen as being assertive and also positive. It's always been seen as a really negative thing where women who are assertive are trying to steal men's jobs. When this girl boss movement is actually seen as a good thing, firstly, you have more women like pursuing this assertiveness, and this means that in the boardroom, rather than sitting back being passive because they're really afraid of being like bullied by their male coworkers, they'll actually speak up, get those promotions, and actually progress in their careers. And secondly, more men are going to be a part of this girl boss movement as well. Like I don't think that the girl boss movement is like intrinsically only for women as well. When it's such a popular part of public media, when a lot of movies such as Ocean 8 take a really popular movie for men, such as Ocean's 11, switches to an all-female cast and show women as just as smart, just as capable, we think that a lot of men are actually going to buy into this narrative and think that women are just as capable. This breaks down pre-existing stereotypes. This improves the quality of life for women. And this firstly opens up a huge amount of potential that's like completely unresponded to from the affirmative team. They need to get up at third and tell us why this is bad for women to be seen in this way. Finally, I'm going to move on to my split, but before I do so, I'll take a point of information.
We gave you multiple reasons why, like, infighting in the workforce and like men trying to like bring down this movement would lead to worse outcomes for women in these places. Could you please respond to this?
Okay, firstly, we think it's empirically untrue. That was my point just then. We don't think all men are going to start tearing down women because of the popularity. We've seen a huge transition of assertive women being seen as positive. And secondly, even if there are some men who are actually being like really sexist, when women are assertive rather than passive, they can actually take this up with like higher ups and tell people that like they spoke up in a meeting and a higher up shut them down. This is much better than people just being passive and men being able to ignore them. Moving on to why this narrative has significantly uplifted minority women and women of color. So firstly, we're going to tell you why this breaks down deep-rooted stereotypes around these women and why these women are targeted by this the most in society. This looks like Asian women being like seen as incredibly submissive and not actually able to pursue a political career or like a business career in general. When you have movies such as Ocean's 8 coming out and having like a really diverse cast of women, this girl boss movement is done really well by the public, or else the public boycotts it. When you have this diversity and you have Asian women being seen as really intelligent, you have this in Grey's Anatomy, you have this in Ocean's 8, you watch this, you understand this, and you get more of these stereotypes being broken down in society. Secondly, you actually give these women far more independence and choice. This looks like Black or Hispanic women who have been living in like socially and economically disparate areas for their entire lives. People like Rihanna and Nicki Minaj are complete girl bosses who pulled themselves up from these areas and succeeded. This shows women that they can do it too, that they are so capable of doing this, and nothing that the patriarchy can tell them actually stopped these women, so therefore they can follow these paths too. Finally, on this idea of why the girl boss narrative is uniquely able to do this. Firstly, there's role models and aspirations. Secondly, there's an incredible amount of popularity, so that means the entire society is buying into this. And finally, one woman can actually uplift a huge amount of women. On our side of the house, we actually prioritize the financial independence of women and women being able to escape from abusive relationships. They only wanted to get rid of this because not all women are going to be CEOs. Incredibly proud to negate.
Thank you so much, Hiso. Okay, so now we have the final substantive speech from, who's it going to be from? Oh, and it's from Travis. Woo! Go Travis! Woo!
The only way that the opposing team was going to win today's debate was if they proved that the benefits of the feminist movement adopting girl boss narratives does not only apply to the women in top corporate positions, but also applies to women ranging across the entire industry and the entire firm in lower level and middle management positions. Crucially, our case benefits a much broader, wider group of people and creates better impacts for that group of people because we protect all women and we provide empowering support structures for all women to feel represented by the feminist movement, not just prioritizing people that come from rich, upper class, white backgrounds, and they can achieve corporate success in that way. So 2 points of clash today. Firstly, should we prioritize the individual success of top achievers in the corporate world? And secondly, what are the values that these girl boss narratives are instilling in young women or in women in the business world? And is this harmful to the way in which the feminist movement is operating? So firstly, let's talk about the prioritization of individual success for these like top CEO achievers. The opposing team wants to prioritize like women achieving top corporate positions. And crucially, we also achieve this on our side of the debate. Down the line, we have said that we enable women to be in top corporate positions through like collective action and through women supporting each other and cooperating to reverse the power structures of the patriarchy. But when you only prioritize the individual success stories of the top 1% of the top achievers in corporate positions, you do not protect the women in lower level business positions throughout the world and lower level corporate positions, entry level jobs into this market. These women acting firstly like in these industries and firms. Note that this is the group that we should care most about this debate. And in weighing up these 2 points, this group is much more vulnerable. This is firstly because women in lower level corporate positions have less protection from harassment and sexualization from their bosses because they might be in like an expendable entry level job or like they just entered the firm and do not have the same connections as women in top levels of corporate power. So you should be protecting them more. And unlike CEOs, they do not come from the same like rich backgrounds. They don't have the same like funding and like massive tertiary amounts of education and also like previous corporate success to build upon. So they are much more vulnerable in that way as well. Secondly, entry-level positions, there's much a greater chance of like being paid less than male counterparts because you have much less negotiable power and you have much fewer transferable skills than women who are trying to achieve corporate success. So in considering how the feminist movement should be acting in this debate, we should be enabling these women to be represented in the feminist movement so that they can access the support structures that the feminist movement is providing. And feminism has to prioritize wide-sweeping transformative policy change through generating political support, not by creating opposition from power structures that Andrew was talking about, but creating like broad sweeping transformative change so that we can have better policy, equal pay for these lower level and mid-tier positions, not prioritizing the top echelons of success. So secondly, let's talk about what happens when we prioritize women in top corporate positions, and like will there be like a trickle down effect of these like role models helping out lower level positions? Our first response to this is that women who have achieved high level corporate power often had to fight their way to get to that position, had to work really hard to like rise up the rungs of the corporate ladder, and they're not going to be willing to support women in lower level positions because of the toxic ideals that the girlboss narrative presents and the toxic presentation of you have to fight other women to reach this position because you have to prioritize and assert your individual success. Robert told you that the girlboss narratives create this aggressive ideals that turns women against each other. And so you're not going to have people like having others individually rise up the corporate ladder. You're not going to have higher level, top level women helping those in middle management or lower level positions. Secondly, these role models of the top 1% are not going to be resonating with everyday regular people and people who do not want to prioritize corporate success in their lives, especially for those people who, like conservative women, who want to have a life with their family, who want to have a life with their family and kids. This is not a role model that will draw them into the business world. It actually discourages women from entering these industries when they see that these top positions are already filled by high-level women. Conservative women are perfectly fine with a life at home, but they still need the protection from like sexualization and harassment on the street, and they still need the protection that the feminist movement provides in terms of like reclaiming femininity and the like sexualization of women, like preventing against that. Even though they're fine with their corporate life and like the corporate home balance that they have, they still need the support structures of like connecting with other women, going to feminist meetings, seeing other women on public forums, and they still need the like empowering effects that feeling represented and seeing their voices heard in the feminist movement provides. Lastly, these individual success stories that survive in the media are only really portraying white-dominated top corporate women in top corporate fields and people who come from like rich upper-class backgrounds. This is not going to be appealing to the diversity minority groups that we heard in the last 30 seconds of the second speech. And they're not going to be feel represented by this because of the way that media are picking up on these girl boss narratives. So next, let's engage with our comparative on the debate. Collective action is not going to be intangible. Feminists encourages girl boss representatives in the same ways that Isaac talked about, like representation in the media, public forums, physical meeting places, and seeking out fellow women for support. So we want to draw in conservative women, and we want to draw in women in lower level, middle level management positions that aren't looking for the top, like really draining, straining, like stressful positions of corporate power. We want to draw those women into the feminist movement so they can access these like physical support structures and talk about their experiences with other women. And secondly, prioritizing collective action also creates more political support, as Robert and Andrew both talked about, especially by including conservative women and centrist women to have that bipartisanship support. That is the way in which we get like secondary and ongoing policy changes to like have equal pay and to have like workplace protections against harassment. When we have appealed to a wider group of people, a wider base of political supporters, so we have more lobbying power against governments, and we do not have that narrative of only prioritizing the needs of like a small group and small percentage of people. So secondly, let's move on to the values that this narrative is instilling. our first response is that women are, it's not good for women to be like aggressively targeting men in a male-dominated field, because usually when they're doing that, they're going to be cutting into the contributions and achievements of other women in these meetings when they're speaking out, because they're trying to like see them, like get themselves into a better, like favorable position. So when they speak out in meetings, they're only going to be prioritizing their individual success rather than looking at other women and collective action in that way. Secondly, women can still stand up to power structures as an individual choice that they will make. We do not have to have the backing of the feminist movement behind this. Crucially, when you have the backing of the feminist movement behind such a controversial thing and such a aggressive framing of this, Andrew told you how this creates unnecessary political resistance and opposition, and as it frames feminism as an opposition to the supporting structures in society. Lastly, women are not going to be developing the leadership qualities that we want to see in the world. Crucially, that we're prioritizing selfish individual success above cooperating with other women, and perpetuating the narrative that success has to be isolated and individualistic is not the type of leaders that we want in our world. We want leaders who want to support other women, who want to work with other women, and not just want to prioritize their own success in the top 1%. Lastly, these values are going to be really harmful for young women in these industries looking up to these icons, because it instills the value of competing against everyone else in this industry, and it instills the value that women are not supporting other women and that they're not banding together as one. They're isolated and individualistic. So these values should not have a feminist backing, because it removes the political support that this provides.
Woo! Fantastic. Thank you so much, Travis. Are we good to keep moving, or do you want a minute? Nope, good to keep moving. All right. So now we open the floor to the final substantive speaker of this debate, Jack Lishgold. Jack, woo! Go Jack!
Let's be very clear at this point in the debate. This was a regrets motion. This was a motion where we were looking at the impact of what this narrative has had on this movement. And the key point to realize here is not only that this movement, this narrative, has created far more change for women and a far better situation for women than we had 10, 15 years ago when it didn't exist, but also that we've failed to hear a proper walk-through comparative from side Affirmative on how they actually better that system, how they actually better and create a better narrative for women. We haven't heard the mechanisms, and that is why we've won today's debate. So what do we have to do to win today's debate? So we told you that we had to tell you that we can win on either proving that women get a better situation in the workplace or that it's better for women's equality. We think we can win on both in today's debate. We think we win on the basis that that women are now in a better position because of this narrative now than they would have been without it, or with what side Affirmative was proposing. So let's look at 3 points of clash as to how we've done. 2 points of clash as to how we've done this today. Firstly, how we've got more change for women's equality, and secondly, how we've created a better situation for women in the workplace. So firstly, onto this point about women's equality. So when the girl boss narrative is popular, the feminist movement can't achieve other policy, was their contention, right? That's what they told us down the line, right? Firstly, this was like a regrets debate, right? The last 10 years when the girl boss narrative has been popular, we have got the most change for women. We've got maternity leave legislation that has improved this for women. We've got sexual harassment crackdowns on this kind of action. We've got government grants for women in stem cell subjects that have allowed them to further study these. We think we've got this change for four key reasons. Firstly, we think the feminist movement has a larger amount of media and social attention because of this. It's not 100% spent on the narrative, but the narrative does increase the popularity of it, increase the coverage of it. Secondly, we think women still want other change, right? We think that they are still pushing for other types of legislation, not just focused on this girl boss narrative. That just helps them to do it. Thirdly, we think the girl boss narrative increases this media attention, increases this positive spin for the feminist movement. And fourthly, we think that getting women in positions of power, in these influential positions, makes it easier to put in place this kind of legislation, these kind of laws. Having figures like Jacinda Ardern as your Prime Minister makes it far easier to pass legislation regarding females, regarding women's rights. We think that that is a benefit that our side of the House exclusively gets because we actually promote them to get in positions of power, whereas they subject them to traditional stereotypes. We still haven't heard how they break those stereotypes. We also told you about how we changed the narrative from woman being called like sassy or like a bitch to now being like a girl boss narrative that is celebrated, right?
Yeah.
We heard insufficient response on this point. Why is this so important? This is important because it changes the stereotype. Look, there's going to be women who are assertive on both sides of the house, and that's great. On their side of the house, however, these women are not celebrated. They're actually subjected to abuse. They're subjected to criticism for their views. And on our side of the house, they actually have the choice on whether they want to be assertive or whether they want to take up a different kind of role in society. They get that choice on that side of the house, which they crucially don't, because they don't break down the traditional stereotypes that have held back women for so many years. They said that we isolate conservative women who choose to take a more conservative path. Two responses to this.
Yeah.
Firstly, on our side of the house, we provide a choice, right? On their side of the house, the comparative is they have no chance for women to actually be in these assertive roles, no role models, no creation for them to hold these positions of power because they don't have the role models to look up to, because they don't have that inspiration in their society to actually go for these positions of power. But secondly, we think that things like motherhood are really celebrated in our society. We think that these things like really celebrated. We've got things like Mother's Day, which is like one of the biggest events of the year. We've got lots of celebration of mothers, and like girl boss narrative has helped to put in like laws around maternity leave. We think they actually coexist, as shown by like Jacinda Ardern, like going to the UN with a baby. That was something that was really widely celebrated, which pushes both, the conservative narrative and the girl boss narrative. We think that's something we get exclusively on our side of the house. He also gave you a great split around women of colour and minority women getting shamed. This is particularly important because they have been subjected to the harshest stereotypes. You've got Asian women who have been subjected to like really submissive gender roles that have harmed them and allowed them to not get positions of power. On our side of the house, that they actually see that other people just like them are in positions of power, whether that's through pop culture, whether that's through actual people in these positions. They have many different influences to look at. They're more likely on the margins to see these people, be inspired by them, and be able to break free of these stereotypes. They don't get it. Crucially, they never gave us structural reasons why they get changed. We just heard about this collective change and this would get. Why do they not get this collective change? Firstly, because we think that like males who like push against the feminist movement are more likely to feel threatened by this and more likely to attack a collective change. But secondly, just the fact that like this collective change hasn't really worked in the past, as well as the girl boss narrative. Since this narrative has come into place, we've had far more change for women. We've had far more women in positions of power than their collective change policy. They haven't given us proper reasons. We clearly win this point. At the end of this point, we clearly decide that proves better for women's equality. So now moving on to this better situation of the women in the workplace. So we brought you loads of material on how we empower them. We push them into positions of power. We also told you about role models, inspiring women to push themselves into these positions of power. This was great material and it posed huge benefits. So what were their pushbacks? They told us firstly about a toxic workplace, infighting and pushing down of other women. 3 responses to this for you today. Firstly, we think that women understand the difficulties that they share by being a woman, the position that they've been put into society, and we think that they realise that even though they are a girl boss, even though they buy into that narrative, they can still realise that fact. We think we see this with like the collaboration of women in these industries, like Nicki Minaj collaborating with like young African-American female artists coming up, and we think that that kind of collaboration is really positive and something that we get on our side of the house. Secondly, we think that like people who are actively being horrible will be called out, right? There's a difference between like competition in the workplace and actively being horrible, and that goes for men as well. And thirdly, we think this was like a relatively derogatory point, right? They didn't actually take into account like men fighting. They just assumed that like women would just be like really toxic when they were going for positions of power. There's always going to be competition for places in the workplace. Our side of the house actually gets them to push for these positions. They also wanted to talk about unrealistic expectations of CEOs and how this was bad for women. 3 responses. Firstly, it's not all about being a CEO or even being in business. We gave you examples like Megan Rapinoe for the US women's soccer team and artists like Nicki Minaj who promote these kind of girl boss narratives. They aren't in business positions. These are other role models in different industries. We give women a whole branch of industries that they can actually push into and they can actually go for. Secondly, we think it pushes them to go to uni, to go into the workforce, something that they don't get on their side of the house because we break down these harmful stereotypes. We think at the point where we have more women in the workforce, we are actually getting a better result for women because we are breaking down these harmful stereotypes. But thirdly, as we told you, we get role models, which is so crucial given the contradictory nature of what they have been told all their lives. They also told us things about how this means you're more likely to have a blind eye turn to sexual assault. 3 responses. Firstly, if you're in boss positions, you're definitely not going to turn a blind eye to sexual assault. Not only are you a woman in that position, you're also the CEO. You don't want sexual assault in your workplace. That's just obvious. Secondly, they aren't going to be submissive to this kind of idea. They are following these girl boss narratives. That means calling out male bad behavior. Thirdly, although you are still going for individual success, you are still a woman who recognizes those struggles. You still want to correct these situations and stop things like sexual assault, which have held you back for years. We're the side of the house that actually makes progress for women, gets change for women. So proud to oppose.
Woo! Thank you so much, Jack, for closing out the substantive portion of this debate. We've got some great comments from the stream team. They're loving. There's a lot of Auckland representation in there, but I'm sending my love to the mighty Waikato as well. So now it's come to the point in the debate when we, as is traditional, reverse the speaking orders. This is traditional in New Zealand. This is traditional in other places perhaps as well. So I invite the leader of the negating team, and it looks like it's going to be Isaac, to take the floor and give us their leader's reply. Woo! So exciting.
The burden on side F in today's debate was to show that if women in the feminist movement had chosen a completely different approach for the last 10 or 15 years than this girl boss narrative, they would have been able to get substantively more change for women. They've fundamentally failed to do that on 2 counts. Firstly, they have offered a wishy-washy narrative of offering collective change, collective movement for women that they've never fully explained. But secondly, on side neg, we've gone a step further and said how that collective movement is actually really hard to achieve when you've got differences between different women in the movement, where it makes men feel far more attacked when it's not on an individual basis. We've told you how that's really difficult, and we've heard a lack of justification for why it's possible from side F. 2 questions in today's debate. Firstly, how does this narrative work on an individual level, affecting individual women? And secondly, how does it affect women as a broader group within society? Firstly, let's take a look at individual women, because we gave you multiple lines of analysis here. We told you it encourages more women to get into the workforce, which frees them from the shackles of dependence on their male counterparts. We told you it allows them to push for positions of power within the workplace, because that is encouraged. Leadership positions are encouraged. We told you that they're able to push back more against sexual harassment. Their key response to this was that, well, getting women in positions of power, like we've seen in the last 10 years, hasn't actually been because of the girl boss narrative. Crucially, that's just not good enough as a response, because we gave you structural reasons at first as to why the popularity of this narrative changed people's minds. When we actually celebrate these people, when we create role models, when we share experiences of this being something that's realistic, it's not just a coincidence that they can say that it's happened in the last 10 years. We've got the most women in politics that we've ever got before. That's what we're so proud to stand by on side neg. Their next claim under this was that women will be really toxic to each other and put down other women within the workplace. Crucially, we said on a couple of things. Firstly, we said there's a huge difference between competition and being horrible. We think it's completely justified for there to be competition between women because that happens between males. But we said it's far less likely that they're going to be horrible to each other and actively pull the ladder up for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because they just understand the struggles of women and have an understanding of how hard it is to be in a workplace. They're unlikely to just be horrible to them. But secondly, there's a lot of pushback if you do get called, if you do this, given the girl boss narrative, given you're likely to get called out. Their final claim on the individual level was that this isolates conservative women. Look, we've told you on our side of the house that we are happy to give people choice, and we think this narrative has been able to do this because under the status quo, we still celebrate things like motherhood, but we also celebrate individual assertiveness, individual success. We think they can coexist. We don't, and we think that a lot of conservative women and politicians actually really, like Kelly Loeffler, actually really support this. But secondly then, let's take a look at women as a broader group within society. The key claim on this was that we are unable to get no other policy change because there's such a focus on this girl boss narrative. Look, we've told you right down the line that we've still got so much change under these last 10 years where this narrative has occurred. Why is this? Because of the huge media attention that this narrative draws to the movement. Because women want other forms of change and they don't only push the feminist movement to promote this narrative, they still want policy change. And because on our side of the house, we make it more likely when we get more women in positions of power. Crucially, under this point, we also told you how men interact on a societal level, something that they've had an insufficient response to down the line, because we've told you how it reframes being assertive in a positive light and stops men doing name-calling of assertive women. We told you how men are more able to promote women within their businesses because more women apply to those top positions of power. We told you how men respect women more for this because this is a traditional quality that they want to see in leaders. We are the side of the house that gets change, side with Team Liberation. So proud to oppose.
Thanks so much, Isaac. Love the final line. All right, so now we're going to reverse the reversing, and we are going to invite the leader up, which, if I remember correctly, is Robert Hoskins. Woo! Let's go, Robert.
What needed to do in today's debate was to demonstrate that girl boss narratives provided protection and aid not just for the women who live out these dreams, for the very few who are actually able to make it into these top positions, but to those who are living the rest of the life, the majority of women. Not only have they failed to prove that they provide tangible benefit for these women, but they've also failed to protect the ones that they're actually supposed to be supporting, those who actually make it into these positions. Life is actually worse for these women. 2 points, 2 ways in which we win in today's debate. Firstly, on how the corporate environment actually gets worse, more harmful for the women who choose to enter it. Secondly, on collective success versus collective change. We think that we get much better change, widespread, much better policy output. We think we protect women under our side of the house. Firstly then, on corporate environment. What did they say here? Well, they tried to tell you that stereotypes and the idea of leadership qualities was going to get so much better. Men were just going to accept these assertive women because of these narratives that were coming across. We told you that criticism and hate towards women was actually going to increase, that men were going to respond really negatively to these sorts of narratives that we're being pushed. And this was going to make it a lot harder for women to succeed because they're not underlying the structural issues that actually result in these issues. They're not actually pushing forwards for the policy that actually allows these issues to be addressed at a higher level. We also told you the workplace culture gets a lot worse. It creates that toxic culture, not only because of infighting, not only because of higher rates of competition, which we think is damaging no matter what gender it comes from, but also because it makes them more likely to overlook issues of of low-level sexual harassment and other issues as they try and climb up the corporate ladder. Their response to this was just like, oh, women emphasize with the struggles, but when we told you when there's such massive media pressure on them to make sure that they get and keep in these top positions, they're not actually supporting other women, and they're actually making the toxic culture so much worse. Secondly, then, on how this builds on how this reduces the ability to make collective change. And this is where we really win and build the margin in today's debate, because they were actually, this is a massive group of people that they're locking out of the feminist movement. It's a massive group of people that no longer get the support structures that we were able to prove we got on our side of the house. What we told you is that the stories that get told because of girlboss are only the very top stories that aren't representative of the movement as a whole, aren't representative of the world as a whole. That feminism has to be always pushing for broad sweeping change, and that we would have gotten far more effective change over the last 10 to 15 years if we'd actually been pushing for more collective action, more group action, more bipartisan action. And we told you that they tried to respond and said that, well, we can coexist the idea of choice with feminism, but when at the point at which the feminist movement is actually pushing so hard just to really emphasize a certain sort of story, a certain sort of success story, this locks out women from this movement. They don't feel like they're being represented. They don't feel like there's an actual place for them. Because of this, not only does the political power of these parties decrease, not only does the political capital to actually make the change that would change how women are treated in the workforce, make the change that would impact how women are able to actually deal with issues like sexualization, actually deal with issues like abuse. But it also means that women actually have a lot harder time creating the support structures for each other. That women who aren't necessarily going for those going for these top corporate positions actually get locked out of the structures that support them in their day-to-day life. We think that this is a much bigger group because, as we told you down the line, the people who are actually able to live out these girl boss ideals are a very small percentage of women. The ones that are actually impacted far larger are the ones that actually aren't living out these ideals. We told you that this comes from a wide spectrum across the political change. We told you that we still get women in top positions when we're able to change the underlying support structures, when we're able to push for collective action, when we're able to change the legislation. Very proud to allow women to achieve their goals no matter what they are.
Woo! Thank you so much, Robert, for closing out a fantastic debate, a very high quality debate, I would say. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to thank each and every one of you, and I think the adjudicators enjoyed it too. I like to believe that. And the crowd definitely enjoyed it as well. I'd also like to thank every one of your mascots, Reese, Marshall, Chase, what's the cop dog's name, and Rocky. I'd like to thank all of them for their efforts in this tournament and today. But finally, I'd like to thank the stream team. I'll turn them off now. Thank you so much, stream team. You've been my favorite stream team so far. That concludes episode 5.
Love you, Stella.
Love you, Stella. That concludes episode 5 of the NZIER National Schools Debating. Tune in next time. Road to the finals, baby. Let's go.